given this heated climate and the many personal stories within our classrooms, how can we cue in positive discussions on immigrants and immigration? Where should we start? What should we avoid?
Let me jump in. First of all, thank you so much for letting us be here. It's been great to listen to everybody and learn with you all. One of the things I think that sometimes we get lost in is educators seem to have a current event bias at the moment, right? As if everything is happening now is happening for the very first time. And I think Federico and Kira and others were kind of not getting us there. And so I think it's really useful to step back and remember that migration is really our shared experience as humans. Can you hear me? Right? So history and literature can provide a safe distance to really get at some of these deeper issues and help us identify some of these patterns. Isn't to say you don't want to build a conversation about identity up front, but we don't want to get lost. We want to be able to create a safe space so people can start to recognize patterns. And so I don't think we want to get caught in a storytelling bias or a newcomer bias. This is only for newcomers or current. We need to find ways to connect past to present. And in this climate, it may be helpful to start with literature and history instead of the current event right now.
Monica?
I agree with Adam. I think keeping it positive is always good. I think when you work on the policy side, you tend to get into the weeds of this what we're seeing right now with these new policies being enacted. But I think the big picture, and sometimes what I use that I think is very helpful, is to I love cartoons. Thank you, Federico, for bringing that. I use them a lot. And I like to use historical cartoons because it really shows that this bias and this difficulty for some societies to welcome people from other cultures comes from many, many years ago. This is nothing new. We've dealt with this before, and we can highlight the successful stories of immigrants in America, which are so many.
I just linked a piece. that just did that, teaching about political cartoons. But it's a good news story. Migration is a good news story. It's why humans are where we are. Exactly,
and history is often a tremendous place to start, especially given how contentious current immigration events are. But I'm wondering, Federico and Kira, for people who are educators in this webinar who are teaching other subject areas beyond ESL or social studies, are there ways of bringing immigration into those kinds of curriculums as a teaching and learning tool beyond just, this inventor was a famous immigrant?
Well, I think that there is a way to bring a number of, or rather deal with immigration in a number of topics. I was thinking, if you're teaching math, it will be very easy to deal with the immigration rhetoric right now by looking at real statistics of how many, as you showed, some of the statistics that you showed, Denzil, how many students or how many people are here documented, how many people are here undocumented, what is the impact of immigrants in our communities. Those are numbers. You can look at all sorts of numeracy using immigration data as your content. If you were talking, for example, about teaching science, something that I actually do a lot in my teaching, in my teacher training with science, is look at the different way that different cultures relate to both nature, the natural world, and to science. Many times our approach to science and our approach to our relationship to the world, one of master over nature versus living in harmony with nature, those things have to do with our original cultures. So you can have a discussion of topics in science, for example, focusing on culture and how you perceive the world because of the culture you grew up in. I don't know, Kira?
I want to echo I think the use of statistics and data analysis which carries across math at pretty much every single level, and not just using contemporary statistics, but also looking at some historical trends and bringing that into math problems or into conversations about statistics and independent projects that students might be doing. Numbers express so much of our history, so that is certainly really useful. And so, yeah, so I think that you can integrate it in other content areas. And then even in the arts, I want to just highlight that bringing in different artists from different parts of the world throughout history, whether it be visual art, plays and dramas, poetry, music, that it's not just in the core academic disciplines where you can create those windows and mirrors to validate students and expose them to other cultures.
If it helps, I just posted a really lovely piece about a biology teacher teaching about her genetics class, her genetics unit. She began by exploring issues of migration. That was a storytelling piece, and then they went and followed genetic codes. So it's our archaeology, it's our paleontology too.
And something several of you talked about earlier, especially like you, Federico. We need to create more welcoming classrooms, but parents and the broader communities must also be considered. Polls have consistently shown that the American public thinks that schools are where immigration has the most deleterious effects. So how can we engage with not just immigrant, but US-born parents toward creating more inclusive, understanding, and productive learning environments? Monica and Adam, do you have suggestions?
I mean, forgive me for being a loudmouth here, but I mean, I think this is where storytelling is really powerful, right? I think one of the things we've been noticing, a lot of these storytelling initiatives, a lot of the white kids have been struggling actually trying to find their ways into some of them. They've disconnected somehow from these stories, and so it's really powerful in a way to take advantage of these positive feelings that people have on their family narratives, and how can we start to bring those out as a way to start to build connections and also see distinctions between other experiences, past and present. There was a clip I just watched last week. Paul Ryan was on Henry Louis Gates' show, Finding Your Roots. He's beaming learning about his own immigrant identity, right? It's an opportunity to start to connect with people's positive sense. I mean, there's also larger discussion about the future and economic opportunity, but I think one of the safest places to start is thinking about family pride, right?
Yeah.
Family pride is a way in, but then recognizing we're all going to work in a very diverse world. 26% of the kids under 18 in the U.S. are of immigrant origin. So if we want to be successful in the careers that we choose, we're going to have to learn to work with and understand and accommodate difference. It's going to be the civic challenges that we face are going to be around issues of migration. So if we don't take up these issues, I think that we'll be leaving all of our kids behind. And I think that's powerful. But you have to find a safe way in.
If I may add, Denzil, one thing is working also not just in the schools, but in community centers where you can work with people who may not have parents or children in the schools, but with a community at large, doing the same workshops that you would for teachers in community centers, reaching other people.
I think it's important to highlight that the best system of welcoming immigrants is America. You know, when Adam was saying it's a good story, it is a good story because there's no other country that brings in somebody from another country and makes them Americans so quickly and so proudly and so well done. I mean, I've had visitors from Germany, like trying to find out how we do it in America because it's so successful. It's such a good story, and let's not forget that we have the best way of doing this, of welcoming immigrants.
And Monica, I'd like to keep it with you for a question from one of our attendees. Elaine was wondering whether you have any, we're talking about parents, and parents can be empowered to advocate more for their students. Do you have any specific resources, or can you think of any strategies for Latinx parents who are looking to take a stand on school issues, advocacy, working with allies, that kind of thing?
Well, I think the first thing is for parents to have open communication with the school. It doesn't have to be the principal, just at least one professor, somebody that they have a good relationship with. I've read of schools that have like somebody at the school who's like an immigration liaison, who speaks Spanish, who can like interact with the parents, and that's really helpful to build those bridges of having somebody, an adult, to go to the school to be able to relate the things that the students are dealing with, or the families. Because the problem with the Latinx community is a lot of them don't speak the language. The children are doing the translation, and they need, it's like a special situation having, you know, your child translate for you. So it brings some challenges, I think, for the families that are trying to work with schools.
Can I jump in there actually and just point out a lot of districts and then also some nonprofits and local communities can provide translation services. I know that's definitely something in New York that teachers are facing all the time, is how to better communicate with parents. And so contact your district, and if not your district, reach out to other organizations that exist for those communities to find translation services.
And one of the things we learned last year, Federico, you were with us for our Immigrant Student Success online workshop in July, is that given how things are happening, teachers can no longer sugarcoat things. They can't diminish the possibilities that bad things may happen to students with undocumented families. And even when just talking about current events, it's so difficult, as Adam spoke about, you know, not editorializing, not having a certain bias when it comes to just talking plainly about what's happening. So this is a sort of two-part question. Federico, Adam, anyone who wants to jump in, you know, how do you talk about current events in the classroom without editorializing? And then how do you respond to students' concerns about themselves and their families?
Well, if I may start, obviously editorializing could be a problem. Particularly in our programs where we work with federally funded programs and publicly funded programs, it's difficult because you are at a risk if you start editorializing. That does not mean, however, and this is something that I insist to teachers, it does not mean that you don't have an opinion, that you can't even share an opinion. You can share your opinion. You can say, you start by saying, I am aware of this problem. You don't sugarcoat it because the time of sugarcoating is well past. You cannot sugarcoat it. You have to say, yes, I am aware of the problem, and these are resources, people who can help you. You need to be very aware of what resources are there to help immigrants in your community, and tell people to avail themselves of those resources. Not think anymore, and it has happened in Texas, not think that being in school will protect you because there are ICE raids in the parking lots of schools. So, and these are adults, our students are adults, and adults have been detained at the end of school as they come out. So we can't sugarcoat it, we cannot ignore it, and I insist, we need to have an opinion. We cannot simply say, as we used to 30 years ago, say, well, I don't want to share my opinion on this issue. We have to have an opinion. We have to make a stand, so to speak, but without editorializing, without making political statements. I think Monica has a hand.
Yeah, real quick. I know it's almost the time, but I think teachers and counselors and school administrators are in the front lines of this. They're dealing with the families, they're dealing with the students. You know, it's a very hard position that the teachers are in. And it's very, very difficult. I mean, telling a family you should get your papers right, because if you get deported, maybe you won't be able to take your child, or your child won't be able to go to school. This is really, really hard. And whatever we can do to help you navigate this, I mean, we're here. The ADL has 25 regional offices. We cover the whole territory. But I think it's really, really difficult. We right now have a collaboration with the 50 Mexican consulates around the country to help the community as much as we can. But this is, I feel bad for the teachers and the school administrators because they're really on the front lines of these issues.
Adam?
Although I think that the point that you just made was dead on. I think that teachers are really under a lot of stress. But when we're talking about a current event, one of the things I think it's really important to start with is just a very simple exercise. You ever do an iceberg, right? And you may recognize a controversy, but what's underneath these stories? Because that's the quickest way to begin to understand that sometimes these controversies are just the beginning of just the tip of much longer story, and they give you an opportunity for deeper exploration. The second thing is really important to think about using very good quality resources to explore that, right? People are getting so much junk, so it's really useful to have some list of curated resources for teachers with some guided questions that'll help you explore it. So I posted a couple of these. We've created a bunch of these on current events. They're useful as an entry point, but I think what you'll recognize that these stories are just the tip of the iceberg. It's why it would be a mistake just to teach current events. We need to go underneath these stories. We need to really actually teach that migration is a good news story.
And we're just about run out of time, and I know there are some other questions from Chris and Elaine and Marissa. I do encourage you to reach out to our presenters individually if you can to get your questions answered. They'll be happy to offer you whatever advice that they can. A lot of the resources that were mentioned in this webinar will be available on our website afterwards. All recordings and slides will be posted up. And before we go, I want to ask each of our, well, first I want to thank all of our presenters from sea to shining sea. They've joined us from San Diego to Boston. Thank you for making the time to be with us today. And as you go, I know, Federico, you need to go first. So I want each of you probably just to take 10 seconds and give our attendees perhaps one actionable item, one best strategy, one word of advice you think when it comes to this topic of dealing with immigration in the classroom today. And Federico, perhaps we can start with you.
Okay, if one word of advice, build community. Build community by identifying themes. We are all immigrants in this country. We come from different backgrounds. Build community by identifying those common themes, the common story, and the pride that many of us have in the stories of our families.
Adam?
I would say think very carefully as you bring up these stories so we don't just put the immigrant kids on display. I think there's a natural tendency right now to say, oh, these kids have a story. And what that does is it reinforces in us and in them. It's, again, you know, in the idea of building community, let's find ways to tap into our common history and our common and shared stories.
Yeah. Monica?
Yes, for me, my piece of advice is ask for help. Don't be afraid to call and bring an expert. Don't be afraid to reach out to an organization. It's really a lot to deal with, and we're here. I mean, it's not only ADL, it's many organizations. We're here to help you.
My advice would be to anticipate difficult conversations and set ground rules in the classroom. And this is no matter what subject area you're teaching, because what is happening in our world infiltrates every classroom.